Well, welcome to my panelists, and welcome, I was going to say welcome back to all of you, but you haven't been anywhere. We've just had a fascinating two-way conversation about uncertainty and how to understand uncertainty and disruption in the world. This panel is about re-globalization, de-globalization, the future of globalization. But I'm going to start with a little sort of rapid-fire round of reactions to what we've heard, and also ask my panelists how they think about uncertainty, very briefly. But let me very quickly introduce who we have here. Just here is Mark Barnett from Mastercard Europe, President of Mastercard Europe. You've already seen Nassim Taleb. And Paula Assis, who's Chair and General Manager for IBM for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Adam Tooze, old friend of mine, a professor of Columbia. I said earlier that I think of Nassim as kind of the theorist of disruption, and I think Adam is the contemporary historian of our global disruptions. And at the far end, we have Michał, Gajewski, CEO of Santander Bank Polska, and Zbigniew Jagiełło, who's member of the supervisory board of the IT group at SECO and many other boards, and has had many other important positions in finance. Welcome to everyone. I want to start with Michał Gajewski, just to ask you for your just very quick thoughts on uncertainty, from your point of view as a business person in finance. What is the main source of uncertainty? How do we deal with it? Or your reactions to what Nassim has been saying, if you prefer.
Good morning. First of all, it's a great privilege and honor to me to be really here, and especially because this is my hometown. So really
welcome
great
home.
To be in my hometown. The second thing is that today I put my skin is in the game, because and really I am the material risk taker to participate with Mr. Taleb in this discussion. Although I don't have a tie, I don't wear the tie, and I am just a humble retail banker, right? Nothing to do with the investment banking, but still. I am a banker, and as I mentioned, we run here a serious operation, Santander operation in Poland. Yeah, there is a lot of uncertainty in the world, and in fact, you cannot predict all the things. You cannot also understand all the risk, but what is important is really to embrace uncertainty. I believe that for a retail bank, especially for the bank who offers really the plain vanilla type of the products like deposit credits, it's extremely difficult to be anti-fragile. In fact, our ambition is to be more robust, in a sense that, and here is my skin in the game, we are using models based on the Gauss curve. We are using normal distribution in our credit models. And of course, we have also models which are based on value at risk, but our exposure is very much limited. But saying that, of course, randomness is a feature of the life, and I used to say that it's better to be a warrior in the garden than the gardener in a war. So be prepared and embrace uncertainty. I believe this is the main important thing.
Thank you very much. Anna Paula, I mean, you come from the technology sector. How do you see this? And in particular, is technology itself a great source of uncertainty, risk, danger, maybe?
We try not to make it so uncertain. And let me try to explain how. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor. I think that uncertainty has been part of the human history forever. I think the change now, and Nassim mentioned this very clearly, is the speed of the uncertainty that is hitting us every single day. And when we look at how companies, governments, even ourselves have to prepare to deal with that, I think of three attributes. First, flexibility, adaptability. Second, your speed of decision making. And third, your agility to execute. So there are technologies that have been introduced in the past, I would say 20 years. First one on cloud, which allows companies to develop new workloads very fast and move those workloads around multiple systems to provide that level of flexibility. When we think about decision making, the volume of data that you need to analyze today is massive. So artificial intelligence comes as a powerful technology to support companies in decision making, getting great insights from data. And in terms of agility of execution, we are seeing more and more automation coming to life. And automation infused with AI technologies. Now, we all know that every new technology that is introduced in the world, it comes with a lot of concerns, uncertainty, how this technology is actually going to perform, what risks does it bring. So areas that we need to take into consideration as we are developing those technologies is what's the purpose? Is it trustworthy? Is it secure? Is it safe? Does it bring more upside than downside? So I think those are the things that we have to discuss as a society right now. But I do see that technology is a very strong solution to address many of the impacts that we are facing through this rapid and accelerated level of uncertainty that we are facing.
It's nice to hear a relatively hopeful message that technology can be part of the solution. Zbigniew, how does this look from your point of view?
Thank you, Martin. I heard your interview with Mr. Taleb, and you touched a lot of topics, but the most important from my side was this part regarding war in Ukraine. Because when we think about uncertainty currently in Poland, for us Polish people and for our country, this is the main source of uncertainty currently. So the question is how this war, the situation in Ukraine will develop, because I am convinced that it will influence not only the next months or few years, but next cadency for Poland, and I hope that for Europe as well.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important reminder. We'll get back to Nassim in a second to hear his thought. Let me just finish the round here. Mark, what do you think?
So look, first of all, great to be here. My first time in Poznan, my first time at Impact, really marvelous. Look, the way we think about uncertainty is we try to adopt a mindset of what we call confident paranoia. Sounds a little bit contradictory, but confident because, I can speak from my context as at Mastercard. We have an incredible business model with, just to be very quick about it, 3 billion consumers on one side, 100 million merchants on the other side, and 20,000 financial institutions, fintechs, PSPs, and so on in the middle. Many of you here, and we bring all that together with our fantastic brand, which creates trust, where people have no reason to trust each other, our franchise rules, which ensures that brand promise comes to life, and our technology network, which in 210 countries can authorize a transaction in the blink of an eye. So confident because we have an incredible, very adaptable, very scaled business model, but paranoid because although we worry about all the things that you mentioned, like cyber and so on, we have, we'll never be complacent. We have great strengths there, and the future of AI, and we invest in these sorts of things. It's really, we're waiting for, I don't want to call it a black swan because it'll, what are the big things out there that we should really be worried about and be paranoid about? And they are things like technology driving new business models. We see a great example here with Blick, which is an alternative payment model. We start to partner with those sorts of players. We also see the political dislocations creating a drive for sovereignty and domestic solutions, where by their very nature, payments need to be cross-border and as scaled as possible. So there are some things we remain very paranoid about, but confident paranoia is our mindset that we try to adopt to deal with uncertainty.
And of course, a famous business leader said that only the paranoid survive. Adam, we've heard some reflections on how this looks, especially from the business perspective. Most of your books are really about something that seems foundationally stable and suddenly collapses. You've done the interwar period, the great financial crisis, of course, the pandemic. I'd like you to take us really into the meat of the subject here on how these things that maybe we need to be paranoid about, these fat tails, these extreme outcomes that we're not often well enough prepared for, how do they affect global coordination, the global economy? Are we actually seeing a fragmentation? Are we seeing a reshaping of globalization? What's your take?
I think in the global space right now, there is a ripple effect, really, of the profound uncertainty from geopolitical conflict. I think that we have to come back to that. I was very struck by your intervention, Martin, in the interview with Nassim earlier. The single source, the single greatest source of uncertainty comes from the war. And I think Nassim rather sort of sterilized that by immediately saying, well, we have a formula for understanding how it happened. Whereas my impression, if we're honest with ourselves, is that we actually were, most of us, taken by surprise by the fact that it happened. I don't actually think we had a very good model for understanding Putin and Moscow, and I think that has shaken Europe in a profound way and is a major source of deep, radical uncertainty now. The second thing that's really remarkable about this war, and again, it's kind of a synecdoche, it's like an image of the broader situation, is we don't know how this war is going to end. We don't, I think, either really quite know, if we're honest with ourselves, how a struggle between the West and China would end either. This is quite unlike many of the more recent wars of choice, in which really the outcome was foreordained. It was clear the Americans were going to beat up the Iraqis. It was just a question of how damaging it would be and what the repercussions were. This is the first existentially engaged war on a large scale where we don't know the outcome in advance. And I think that's true for the Sino-American conflict, which is also, I think, deeply rooted to broader destabilization. What side should Apple be on going forward? What is the right side to pick? And the third really fundamental source of uncertainty that's rippling out from geopolitics right now, if you speak to business leaders around the world, is we're not even certain about our own reaction function. So it's not just that we're finding it very hard to understand the Putins and the Xis, and it's not just that we're not certain where the gods of history are actually going to come down, but we're not actually even entirely certain about how we, the supposedly consolidated West, lines up. I mean, I would literally give money to anyone in the room who could give me a confident prediction as to how Washington's politics unfolds on China right now, or the complex politics of the EU. So that, for me, you know, if you're a business person trying to organize a large global corporation, are really the three fundamental sources of uncertainty. And that produces hedging. It has to produce hedging. People then have to engage in a variety of different strategies. And that, I think, is where quite a lot to answer, you know, to really begin to answer the economics. That, I think, is quite a lot where the sort of slow globalization is coming from now. We're not pulling back entirely, that's entirely infeasible, but hedging, realigning, building strategies that allow you to deal with what is a far more uncertain world than the one we were in 5 to 10 years ago.
Are you, just to follow up very quickly, are you sort of saying we're a bit paralyzed here? It's all so new, so many surprises, things we didn't expect to happen, and we just kind of sit there a bit like deer in the headlights.
I mean, if you are trying to make very large-scale investments in the tech space right now, your options are really complex, right? Because you have to choose between the status quo, which worked, and a reality which seems to point in a different direction. And on, say, green energy, one of the great investment fronts in the current moment, the answer is pretty simple. You go for regionally based incentive schemes which are going to deliver hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. But I think when it comes to big tech, there's really a kind of, you know, can we really seriously believe that we're going to try and seriously disentangle the microchip smartphone line? And there, I think, not paralysis, but from the point of view, I have huge sympathy for business leaders who have to make very large-scale, medium to long-term investment decisions under the current scenario. Same in the fossil fuel sector. How does that sector adjust to this reality? This is where politics in the current moment, I think, has a real, this is something you're very strong on. How do we drive investment under these kind of circumstances? We need strong, clear, directional leadership to overcome what is otherwise, I think, as you say, potentially quite a serious impasse.
Nassim, do you want to respond? I'm particularly keen on understanding how we how we avoid becoming paralyzed.
Okay, so let me sort of like weave into, using the conversation we had before and the comments made here into the thing I love the most and I hate the most about globalization and then the structure. With globalization, remember we talked about Extremistan. You have accentuation of the Extremistan effect, but with it come two things: pseudo-stability and pseudo-efficiency. So let me explain, and they're both with a very simple thought experiment. The cheapest way, let's say we have a factory here, and you find suppliers. You have 57 possible suppliers. If you take the 57 suppliers, to be diversified, your cost will be a lot higher. If you take just one supplier, okay, the cost will be the minimum. So what happened is that because of pressure by accountants who don't understand anything about risk, companies in America under competitive, pseudo-competitive system have been pushed to have just this minimum number of suppliers who happen to be in that country, that big country, east of India, all right? So, and then, okay, works very well. So we had a deflation, really, in many fields. And then suddenly there's something called COVID that shut down some of these factories. So you went from good business to zero, okay? So that's pseudo-efficiency, and that's also pseudo-stability. So if you multiply, so it's not efficient to have 57 suppliers, but maybe the efficient is 3 or 4 suppliers in 3 different continents, for example. So the whole concept that people don't get, that it's not more efficient to drive at 500 kilometers per hour than ride a bicycle. If you drive 500 kilometers per hour, it's going to look fast, but with probability 1, you're never going to get to destination. Okay. Go ahead.
Mark wants to come in here.
I was just going to say, I mean, perhaps it's that globalization went too far.
Exactly.
Globalization has
Yes.
been a very, very. I'm as old as my company. My company grew up in the golden age of globalization. And it's brought enormous benefits, I think, to society and is a force for good in the world.
Yeah.
So I think it's the extent to which globalization, the world's, the rules-based world order, the settlement post the Second World War, with the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and all these great institutions that have kept the peace for 70 or 80 years and created enormous prosperity. Don't think we can just chuck that out and say globalization is a bad thing. What we've got to do is say...
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying globalization, like any medicine, you go to the pharmacy, you get medicine, it has side effects.
Exactly.
If you don't know the side effects, all right, never take the medicine. Globalization only works. It's a great thing, pull people out of poverty. It works beautifully. However, okay, you need to understand the side effects. You need to understand what you're into, okay? If you're going to have, I love squid ink pasta. If I eat too much squid ink pasta, I get sick, all right? So it's exactly the same thing. You have to know the limit and side effects. And effectively, it's not that hard to have 3 suppliers. Don't have 57 suppliers, just don't have 1. So it's very small.
This seems to be exactly what's driving a lot of politics in both in the US and on the European side of the Atlantic at the moment. So one possible outcome would be something like a re-globalized world that's fragmented into a couple of blocks. China, Europe, depending a bit on who becomes the next president of the US. Is the US going to be its own block? I'd like to hear a bit about how well prepared we are for that sort of world. I mean, Mark, let's just continue with you. Your business is totally global, but what would happen to you if we suddenly see fragmentation along regional lines?
I'm sort of confident that even if the political forces push us apart politically, the one thread that will keep us all together is trade. Because everybody knows, whether it's the Chinese bloc, the Russians, Europe and the US together or separately, that trade makes us all richer. And it doesn't seem that we're having a huge disruption in trade. We're having a sort of phony war in terms of where the politics is taking us, at the macro level. So as long as we keep trading, and I don't see that not happening, then I think things will begin to heal and we'll get back to that multilateral world that we've been used to for many years.
Optimistic. And Paula, your sector is maybe where it's the least phony war, because we do see sort of real policy moves to stop technology exchange, for example.
Yeah, no, I do think that what we need to work now is to find the right balance between developing local capabilities and avoiding protectionism, right? Create systems or regulations that at the end of the day will not advance the development of technology and not create the collaborative approach that technology requires to continue to evolve. So I think that when we look at how we are going to reshape globalization, that we avoid aspects that are normally associated with creating very strong protectionism practices. Free flow of data is the basis of technology going forward. So this is one of the things that when we look at agreements and frameworks that are in place that allow the data to be exchanged in a way that supports the innovation is going to be absolutely critical. And again, let's make sure that there is collaboration across multiple countries, because that's the only way that this is going to evolve.
But globally, or multiple countries within groups of friends? Janet Yellen talks about friendshoring in trade. We can ask the same question in technology and data exchange.
I do think that these things happen well when there are like-minded countries operating together. So eventually there will be blocks. That's probably one outcome. But when it comes to getting those blocks working together, that we make sure that within the bloc, there is a collaboration strategy to implement those initiatives.
Zbigniew and Michał, from your points of view, how well prepared are we for a possibly geopolitically fragmented world? Zbigniew, you were worried from the Polish perspective about how this war, in a sense, determines everything in the future. How well prepared are we?
Thank you for these questions, but I would like to do something, what you mentioned about this globalization, because in my opinion, you focus on this only from the business perspective. But globalization is a more broader problem. And in my opinion, this is in DNA of human. Because when you look at our, history as a civilization in ancient ages, people would like to globalize others. Means the history of Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, because globalization means also expansion. And people would like to expand in their local territory and also global. So I don't think so that talking only about globalization from business point of view is a proper approach. Because in my opinion, even Elon Musk would like to, expand to Mars, yeah? Whether from the people or, other creatures in the space, this is globalization or not.
And I suppose where some of these strands come together is that technology now, compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago, allows
technology
some of these other forms of
this is a
global
tool in the hands
domination.
of human.
Yeah. Michał.
Yeah, in our case, Santander, of course, there is a global company, but I believe we have a very unique business model because we are present in 11 countries, and this is very significant presence, right? And the model is unique because on the one hand, what I am hearing is more convergent, less divergent, but there is also, let's say, a lot of accountability in the local teams to make decisions. So our risk models, our approach to technology, our accountability for making decision is a local one. So I believe that we should rather merge these two concepts, right? Because, yeah, there is something between, right? Because on the one hand, yeah, efficiency and productivity is in the stake where we talk about de-globalization, but on the other hand, really to be less fragile, more robust, right? I believe we should also think about de-globalization. to avoid all those unforeseen events that were mentioned by Nassim.
So I'm getting quite a sort of positive feel here from the panel that, you know, these are challenges, but we're aware of them. We can kind of navigate them. So Adam, I'm kind of looking to you to get a reality check. Maybe can we manage this?
I actually think I would conclude on an even more positive note. I mean, we're viewing the prospect of globalization from Europe, from a transatlantic perspective predominantly, where the level of globalization is already incredibly high. The openness levels are already incredibly high. I think to really feel the force and the energy that sits behind this surging interconnective drive, you have to go to a conference like this in East Asia, or to a conference like this in South Africa or Nairobi or somewhere like that, where the dynamism and the energy and the forces of global trade are actually pulsing at a much faster pace than they are here. If you look at global trade dynamics over the last 10 years, they're predominantly in this terrible phrase, South-South, emerging market, and not all of that is centered on China. Of course, there is deep anxiety about tensions between the West and China, but nevertheless, it's the East Asian realm in general which has been the central driver of this dynamic. And I think there's huge, you know, for Europeans and Americans to call time on the logic of globalization is to perpetuate a kind of rather anachronistic Eurocentrism that has had its day. And when you go to Africa, to use that ridiculous kind of moniker for this huge continent, with a population which will be approaching 2 billion within the next decades, their story of globalization is only just beginning. I mean, not that Africa wasn't incorporated in the most violent way imaginable into the 18th century globalization, but in modern terms, the process of integration is only just beginning. And I think that's really where the frontier of globalization, the story of globalization will be decided in the next generation. And that could be a story of dramatic progress. It could be exactly this story of rapid growth and industrial productivity change. It could also be, and I think this is really what's characteristic of our current moment, Martin, like, it could also be a story of catastrophe. It could also be a story of profound disappointment. And I think our uncertainty in orientating ourselves right now is not that we can't see the future and that there aren't huge opportunities, but the confidence that we had that we were on a train that was taking us there. You know, this confidence that we understood which direction history was moving in, that I think has been quite fundamentally shaken. And one could embrace that. I mean, I think this phrase is good. We should embrace that simply as a new kind of realism, not as a new kind of pessimism.
That's a really exciting vista, and our time is up, so I kind of have to end there, but I can't resist the temptation to ask both Adam and Nassim for sort of, if you can, a 1-2 sentence answer on if globalization in some form is continuing and even intensifying, who will govern it? Who will set the rules, or will it be some decentralized system? From what Ana Paula said, we kind of need some sort of collaborative rules. So who is it? Just very briefly, because they're going to yell at me backstage afterwards. Adam and then Nassim, or the other way around.
A few sentences. Let's say, look at this thought experiment. I want to destroy the industrial capability of the United States, 1980, when the year is 1980. What do? You mount Cincinnati, we have friends in Cincinnati, you want the East Coast corridor, you want the factories in upstate New York. Today, an enemy of the United States wants to destroy the industrial capabilities of the United States. You want Wuhan, you want Shanghai, okay, so this tells you that effectively it's sort of like the connection between the East and West, between China and the United States and Europe is becoming incestuous. So that definitely prevents war. And in the case of Russia, they have, if you look at it, they just sell raw material. They have the tiny blip in world commerce. So this is where, in a way, globalization is an insurance for us against war. So we have to go with it. I mean, I'm definitely in favor of rational globalization, but the best thing is that if China wants to bomb the United States and destroy the industrial capabilities, they will bomb their own factories and move on. Right.
Adam, very quickly.
I think we should accept that this is going to be a multipolar process. It's already a multipolar process. That is where the energy, the expertise, the human talent is bubbling up from below. And I actually think the presumption, this idea of leadership, that someone has to lead and it better be us because otherwise it'll be the other guy, this is actually one of the most dangerous worries out there. And the thing that alarms me, and this goes back to my first intervention, the thing that alarms me on our side is that in Washington, D.C., that talk is alive and well. The presumption to lead, the compulsion to lead, the fear that if they don't, an enemy will. That I think is a dangerous mindset, given the underlying dynamic here, which I think is fundamentally multipolar.
Well, thank you everyone so much. Perhaps more questions than answers, but that might just be the nature of the uncertainty we face. Thanks to everyone. Please join me in applauding the panel, and we'll be right back. Thank you.